Chapter 6 Into the Forest. "I wish the Macready would hurry up and take all these people away," said Susan presently. "I'm getting horribly cramped." "And what a filthy smell of camphor," said Edmund. "I expect the pockets of these coats are full of it," said Susan, "to keep away the moths." "There's something sticking into my back," said Peter. "And isn't it cold?" said Susan. "Now that you mention it, it is cold," said Peter. "And hang it all, it's wet too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet. It's getting wetter every minute." He struggled to his feet. "Let's get out," said Edmund. "They've gone." "Oh," said Susan suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. "I'm sitting against a tree," said Susan, "and look, it's getting light over there." "By Jove, you're right," said Peter, "and look there, and there. It's trees all around, and this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all." And now there was no mistaking it, and all four children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. "I apologize for not believing you," he said. "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" "Do?" said Peter. "Why, go and explore the wood, of course." "Ugh," said Susan, stamping her feet. "It's pretty cold. What about putting on some of these coats?" "They're not ours," said Peter doubtfully. "I am sure nobody would mind," said Susan. "It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't take them even out of the wardrobe." "I never thought of that, Sue," said Peter. "Of course, now you put it that way, I see. No one could say you had bagged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it, and I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe." They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so that they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-up and more suitable to the landscape. "We can pretend we are Arctic explorers," said Lucy. "This is going to be exciting enough without pretending," said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before night. "I say," began Edmund presently, "oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left, that is, if we are aiming for the lamp-post?" He had forgotten for the moment that he must pretend never to have been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. Peter whistled. "So you really were here," he said. "That time Lou said she'd met you in here, and you made out she was telling lies." There was dead silence. "Well, of all the poisonous little beasts," said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed indeed no more to say, and presently the four resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, "I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs." "Where are we going anyway?" said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. "I think Lou ought to be the leader," said Peter. "Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou?" "What about going to see Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "He's the nice faun I told you about." Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stamping their feet. Lucy proved a good leader. At first she wondered whether she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree on one place and a stump in another, and brought them on to where the ground became uneven, and into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken to bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the doorway and was heaped on the floor, mixed with something black, which turned out to be charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and then stamped it out. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed into shreds with a knife. "This is a pretty good washout," said Edmund. "Not much good coming here." "What is this?" said Peter, stooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper which had been nailed through the carpet to the floor. "Is there anything written on it?" said Susan. "Yes, I think there is," answered Peter, "but I can't read it in this light. Let's go out in the open air." They all went out in the daylight and crowded around Peter as he read out the following words. "The former occupant of these premises, the Fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting his trial on a charge of high treason against Her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc., also of comforting her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies, and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Mangum, Captain of the Secret Police. Long live the Queen." The children stared at each other. "I don't know that I'm going to like this place after all," said Susan. "Who is this queen, Lou?" said Peter. "Do you know anything about her?" "She isn't a real queen at all," answered Lucy. She's a horrible witch, the White Witch. Everyone, all the wood people, hate her. She has made an enchantment over the whole country so that it is always winter here and never Christmas. I wonder if there's any point to going on, said Susan. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if it won't be much fun either. And it's getting colder every minute, and we've brought nothing to eat. What about just going home? Oh, but we can't, said Lucy suddenly. Don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It is all on my account that the poor fawn has got into trouble. He hid me from the witch and showed me the way back. That's what it means by comforting the Queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We simply must try to rescue him. A lot we could do, said Edmund, when we haven't even got anything to eat. Shut up, you, said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. What do you think, Susan? I have a horrid feeling that Lou is right, said Susan. I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come, but I think we must try to do something for Mr. Whatever his name is. I mean, the fawn. That's what I feel too, said Peter. I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back to getting something from the larder, only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting into this country again when once you've got out of it. I think we'll have to go on. So do I, said both the girls. If only we knew where the poor chap was in prison, said Peter. They were all still wondering what to do next when Lucy said, Look, there's a robin with such a red breast. It's the first bird I've seen here. I say, I wonder, can birds talk in Narnia? It almost looks as if he wanted to say something to us. Then she turned to the robin and said, Please, can you tell us where Tumnus the fawn has been taken to? As she said this, she took a step toward the bird. It at once flew away, but only as far as the next tree. There it perched and looked at them very hard, as if it understood all they had been saying. Almost without noticing they had done so, the four children went a step or two nearer to it. At this, the robin flew away again to the next tree and once more looked at them very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. Do you know, said Lucy, I really believe he means us to follow him. I've an idea he does, said Susan. What do you think, Peter? Well, we might as well try it, answered Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly. It kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them, but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way it led them on, slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently the clouds parted overhead, and the winter sun came out, and the snow all around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about half an hour with the two girls in front when Edmund said to Peter, If you're not still too high and mighty to talk to me, I've something to say which you'd better listen to. What is it? Asked Peter. Hush, not so loud, said Edmund. There's no good frightening the girls. But have you realized what we're doing? What? Said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side the bird is on? Why shouldn't it be leading us into a trap? That's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, you know? They're good birds in all the stories I've ever read. I'm sure a robin wouldn't be on the wrong side. If it comes to that, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are on the right side and the queen, yes, I know we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either. The fawn saved Lucy. He said he did, but how do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of the way home from here? Great Scott, said Peter. I hadn't thought of that. And no chance of dinner either, said Edmund.
Well, good evening, good evening. I hope y'all are doing well tonight. It's great to see so many of you out. Testing out a new microphone here. All right, perfect. Making sure everybody can hear me well. It's so great to see everybody. Grateful for your presence as always and for being here. For those of you who are tuning in after the fact too, it's great to see you and hear from you after the fact. Every week, I'm always shocked and surprised by how many people show up, watch after the fact, or even live at this time, whether it's here or YouTube, wherever it may be. So incredibly grateful for you. I'm coming to you from my home again tonight. Grateful for just these different places that I'm able to set up to do these studies. And so in some ways I was thinking about it. It's really nice to be able to just invite you into my home each week and to sit down and listen to a chapter together and then discuss it from different perspectives and the rest. And so I'm grateful to have you with me. Without further ado, we are going to dive straight into some of our main slides and the rest for the night as this wonderful and incredible chapter. Let's get into it. So this is chapter 6, Into the Forest. So it starts off by reminding us kind of where it was left off, in essence, which was they had been rushed into the wardrobe, trying to hide because they didn't want to get Mrs. McCready mad at them as she was giving a tour of the facility of this huge old mansion and the rest that they're staying in. And so they find themselves in the closet, in the wardrobe, with the door kind of shutting behind them, hiding in there, when suddenly they start talking amongst themselves. I wish they would just hurry up. It's getting cramped in here. And there's this filthy smell of camphor, which they would put into pockets to keep the moths away. So it's kind of like mothballs and the rest. And then suddenly, Peter and Susan start noticing that there's something sticking in my back, and it isn't a bit cold. Not only cold, but it's a bit wet. In fact, it's getting wetter by the second. And then there's this moment where Susan suddenly says, "Oh." And then they look. She said, "I'm sitting against a tree, and look, it's getting light over there." And then Peter kind of notices and look, there, and there. It's trees all around, and this wet stuff is snow. And then there was this realization why I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all. And so behind them were wet coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. And I love this moment here where Peter turns at once and looks to Lucy and says, "I apologize for not believing you." He said, "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" Now, this is a bit odd for us. This was kind of quintessential British way of dealing with the situation where Peter, in all of his really kind of his maturity, realizes in a moment that the things that they had said about Lucy, that she had been lying and made up this place, that had been going on for quite a while now, was suddenly real. And the second there is a realization that he was wrong, he turns around, he stops at once and apologizes to Lucy, and then asks her if will she shake hands. "Will you forgive me?" in essence, is what he says. And she says, "Of course." And then Susan says, "What do we do next?" And so this got me thinking about a couple of things. One is kind of the importance of apologies and forgiveness. In James 5:16, it says, "Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working." If we're honest about this, there's a lot of people, and especially in our culture today, where when we've done something wrong, we constantly try to play a caveat or play games of, well, how bad it was versus how bad it wasn't, or it wasn't as bad. And we talked about this in previous weeks, even kind of the gaslighting we might do, where we'll say things like, "Well, I'm sorry you felt that way," or "I'm sorry you saw it that way." And we don't actually see things at times the way that they actually are. When we've done something wrong, we should apologize. We should own those things. And Peter gives us a really beautiful perspective of that when he says, "I am sorry that I did not believe you," and specifically states that. Now, in a lot of ways, you can kind of see how Peter might have had a point. What she was saying was something miraculous, something that was like there's a magical world in a wardrobe. And so it would have seemed just far beyond the very premise of rational thought or rational concepts. And yet, the moment he found out it was true, he stops and apologizes, which allows them, in essence, then to kind of move forward. Philippians 2:2-3, "Complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." So here he is, the older brother, the rational brother, and the rest. And when he finds out that the youngest sister was not lying, but was in fact telling the truth, he apologizes, they make good, even if it's a bit humiliating for him. And the reality is, the second he does it, my own inclination towards him is that of, wow, that's something really good. That's a positive thing. I don't think less of him for not having believed it the first time. I think more of him for acknowledging his mistake. And this also kind of gives us this concept of the power of reconciliation. 2 Corinthians 5 says, "All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting us to the message of reconciliation." So often we ourselves, when we are in need of forgiveness or when we have done something wrong, we want people to admit that they have harmed us or wronged us. But in the same way, when we've done something wrong and we ask for forgiveness or need to ask for forgiveness, we should own those things. This world is in need of constant reconciliation. And if they don't see believers or Christians actually acknowledging when they fail, when they fall down, when they mess up, we miss out on opportunities to show what it looks like to be reconciled to God consistently. And also, this lovely little passage speaks of humility. Philippians 2 says, "Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." Humility is not something that we have a world that elevates pride, and humility is not an attribute that is pursued or encouraged or engaged in our current modern world. It just isn't. And that is a sad reality and a sad tale of where we are today. So this goes on and says, Peter says, wow, we go and explore the wood, of course. He's excited. This is a whole new world. This is a good time to go. And then Susan goes, it's kind of cold. I mean, what about putting some out of these coats at least? Now, Peter, being kind of this person that he is, says, well, they're not ours. I am sure nobody would mind. It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't take them even out of the wardrobe. And so this rational thought comes in because Peter goes, well, we can't take these coats. They're not ours. Now, I'll be honest with you, there's not a lot of kids out there today where it's not cold. They wouldn't say, well, take the coat. It's fine. But even that, Susan actually says, well, we're not really leaving anywhere with them. They're staying here in this wardrobe itself. And so Peter says, of course, now you put it that way. I see. No one could say you have bagged a coat or stolen a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe. They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so that they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes. And then I do love that Lucy says, we can pretend we are Arctic explorers. Now, I wanted to note something about this whole premise. It's the value of what I would call practicality. Susan's plan to use the coats for warmth highlights the importance of practical thinking in challenging situations. It shows that even in fantastical settings, mundane solutions can be effective. This teaches the value of using what you have in your environment to solve problems. Now, I am a creative at heart. I am someone who loves to think outside the box. I enjoy thinking big and planning big. In fact, I live kind of off the idea that we should do things so big that the only way we'll ever succeed is if God is part of them. Because I do believe that we have a lot of people who will only do that which they know they can succeed at. And I mean this also within the church, that there's far too many times when we only do the things that we know we will succeed at. And at that point in time, why do you need God? If you can do it just with the resources you have or the people that you have, are you really trusting that God will take care or God will do something far beyond even the moment that you're in? And so that's one side of it. This other side is the value of practicality. And so I kind of asked this question, and it's something I'd be interested to see you answer if you have opportunity. Do we forget the value of the mundane? So sometimes things that can become rote and mundane, just day-to-day things that we go through the motions of, things that we have to do every day. It may seem weird, but brushing your teeth is an important aspect for health and for wellness and even communication and even relationships that you might have. Making sure that you are bathed and clothed, making sure that you remember to eat so that you have strength and the rest. Those can often seem like mundane things. And even we even have this concept of the 9 to 5, just going through the work, going through the motions and the rest. We forget all the things that it provides, all the things that it does, that these mundane actions remind us of. And there are these beautiful moments when we can stop and remember. For example, there's a reason why I believe we have the Lord's Supper that we take every week, because we are forgetful people. Now, there are some, though, who have made this activity to be something that something we do, instead of it being a constant reminder, where the mundane of every week we take the Lord's Supper is also a reminder every week of something eternal, something, in fact, ancient that we do. It's a connection to history, and this repetitive nature is actually something beautiful. So much of the Christian life is what we would often consider the concept of mundane living. Some examples, James 2:17. So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So the everyday actions of loving your neighbor, of doing the small things well, being kind to person, holding a door open. James himself emphasizes the practical expression of faith through action, highlighting the belief must manifest in practical, tangible ways. I would even say mundane ways. the everyday thing, not being a jerk when you drive your car, that you are actually a good person in driving your car, that you open the doors, as I said, for people, that you say please and thank you, that you are someone who is kind, yes ma'am, yes sir, whatever it may be. And you may have chalked those up as like, well, those are ways of the old and the past, and you may be missing something, maybe missing the beauty in the mundane, the everyday things, doing the small things well every day. It's 1 Corinthians 15. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. This verse encourages persistent, practical efforts in service to God, assuring the value of our practical work, our mundane, everyday work. Colossians 3, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. This speaks to the practical approach of doing all work as unto God, infusing everyday tasks with spiritual significance. In 1 Thessalonians 4, aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. This practical advice underscores the value of living a life that is orderly, independent, and respectful, showcasing Christian living in a tangible way, the beauty in the mundane. In fact, I wrote a while back something about this, and I didn't have a chance to add it here in the slides, but there is beauty in mundane actions. In fact, I would argue that there are a lot of people who have come to Christ because of the beauty of mundane actions. And even just rational little small things like what Susan says here is, hey, we should probably take a look at these coats. It's cold out here. So they continue on, and they're going exciting though enough without pretending. They're heading off into the snow. And then all of a sudden, Edmund finds himself saying, oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we're aiming for the lamppost. And this is the moment. He had forgotten for the moment that he must pretend never to have been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. Peter whistled. So you really were here. That time Lou said she'd met you in here. And you made out she was telling lies. There was dead silence. Well, of all the poisonous little beasts, said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed indeed no more to say, and presently the four resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, I'll pay you all for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs. Where are we going anyway, said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. I think Lou ought to be the leader, said Peter. Goodness knows she deserves it. Now notice this, is that he is putting in place Lou because of her having been called a liar and been called out and the rest. And here Edmund is being put in his place, basically being told he's not going to be leading. And so they decide to go and visit Mr. Tumnus. And so she manages to find their way and so forth. But once they arrive there, there's a terrible surprise awaiting them. Now, one of the allegories that I've often found in reading through this is there's a lot of practical real-life applications. And the reality is this. She left and Mr. Tumnus was well. She came back and Mr. Tumnus was still well. Nobody had been found out, except for, if you'll make the connection, that Edmund had actually mentioned that his sister had met a faun named Mr. Tumnus. And so during the time since they've left, Mr. Tumnus's cave has been ransacked and he has been arrested. Life has changed. It is unpredictable. And this kind of gives us an idea of being able to communicate and talk a little bit about the unexpected nature of life. The terrible surprise awaiting them at Mr. Tumnus's cave teaches that life can be unpredictable. You see, for Lucy, it was an exciting place to be back into Narnia and to go back and to see her friend. But it's also a dangerous place, and it's a problematic one. In James 4, we see, come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. You see, we make a lot of plans in this world, but life is unpredictable. I often say to people that there's not one of us whose life is not completely turned upside down by the ringing of a phone. Just the ringing of a phone changes everything. And there have been moments where I've been next to people where the phone rang and everything changed. There have been other moments in my life where a phone rang and everything changed. I remember it's 20-something years now ago. I believe it was after my freshman year in college, one of my dear friends passing in a car accident on his way home from school at Freed-Hardeman. And I remember getting the phone call from one of my friends who just called me up and said, Brian, I need you to sit down. And everything changed from there. That phone call changed everything. Life is unpredictable. And because of its unpredictable nature, well, we must be ready and willing. In fact, James says this. You can't just sit there and hope for tomorrow that everything is going to go exactly the way you think it's going to go. That you have to, in some ways, be always ready to monitor and adjust. It's one of my kind of mottos that I use with the college students is monitor and adjust. If you're doing the same things every year and nothing is changing and you don't expect anything to change, then you end up just becoming insane in a lot of ways because you do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. But also, if you don't evolve over time, you also don't have the unpredictability of life. Things change. I was talking about this with my dad recently. 10, 15 years ago, when I was in full-time youth ministry, on average, the youth ministries would be about 60% girls, 40% boys. Girls tended to be more spiritually mature at that time, especially in high school and the rest. Not always, obviously, I'm making generalities. I'm using very broad terms here, but it was always about 60% girls, 40% boys. Whereas today in campus ministry, what I'm seeing more and more, even in culture in general, that I would say it's more almost 80 to 90% young men than it is young women. They tend to have become more spiritual in the last few years, which has been quite a shift culturally speaking, where I'd have 80 to 90% young men as opposed to young women. Very, very, very large shift. And it's kind of unpredictable. And so ministry has had to adapt and change in some ways for me because of that very premise. In Proverbs 27, it says, Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. Boy, isn't that true. Matthew 24, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even heaven, angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Even when Jesus will return, we do not know. And I do love the cult groups and all of the end of days doomsday people that constantly try to guess as to when the end of the world is going to happen. It's fascinating to me. That verse kind of says, hey, you're not going to guess it. Luke 12, but God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? In fact, I'll also note this, that the unpredictable nature of things, there are some churches out there I know who spend a lot of time storing up money, storing up things, and always looking for the day ahead, never remembering the fact that at any point in time, everything can change. And that instead we should be working at our salvation every day, putting those things to use to serve, to take care, and to love all in this world. So they found the door had been wrenched off its hinges. The whole entire place is smashed apart. And then Edmund says, This is a pretty good washout. And then he looks down. Is there anything written on it? Because Peter finds a piece of paper and he says, Yes, there's something on it. And there's these words. The former occupant of these premises, the Fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting his trial on a charge of high treason against Her Imperial Majesty Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc., also for comforting her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies, and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Maugrim, Captain of the Secret Police. Long live the Queen. The children stared at each other, and they asked, Who is this, Lou? Who is this queen? Do you know anything about her? And Lucy says she isn't really a queen at all. She's a horrible witch, the White Witch, and everyone hates her. She makes it, and here's that famous line again, the whole country so that it's always winter and never Christmas. And then she said, I wonder if there's any point on going on. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks like if it won't be much fun either. And it's getting colder every minute, and we brought nothing to eat. What about just going home? Now, I understand this sentiment. I understand this desire at times to just turn around and go home. I understand the sentiment to not do the hard things, to not do what is often the right thing to do. Now, we are seeing this even right now playing itself out even in the mountains of North Carolina. I was reading an article today of a man, and it was a live video of him speaking, where he has a helicopter and he has been flying in and out, going in and trying to save people and help out with rescues and the rest. And he dropped off some supplies, and after he got to a point where he dropped off some supplies, left his son, who was his co-pilot, behind to take one passenger back, and then was going to come back for them to take the husband back. And it got to a point where he was actually told that if he went back in, he would be arrested. That he would be arrested because he, for whatever reason, the fire chief of that town had decided that nobody should go back into that area. And he refused. He said, I will continue to go back in. And so he went back in to get the individual. And by the time he got back, apparently the fire chief was gone or whatever it may have been. But he had decided to do it no matter the cost, and especially when fear was at hand. And it wasn't because of poor weather or the rest, but the fear of imprisonment, the fear of being arrested for just simply trying to do that which is right to help and serve others. There's a lot of times when bureaucracies get in the way, when individuals get in the way, when people get in the way, where we just have to decide whether or not we're going to do that which is right, or we're going to just turn around and go home. So, this courage versus comfort concept, Susan's suggestion to go home raises the conflict between seeking comfort and continuing in the face of hardship. It underscores the importance of courage, pushing through discomfort for a greater purpose or goal, and rather than retreating to what is known and comfortable. In Joshua 1:9, it says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Deuteronomy 31, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you." 2 Timothy 1, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." In fact, I do believe that there's 365 verses throughout Scripture, one for every day of the year, that specifically denotes, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm 56, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me?" You see, as a believer, as a Christian, death is not the end. And so death is not the great ending of anything. It's the great beginning in a lot of ways of an eternity with God. Isaiah 41, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Philippians 4, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me." Now you have to understand, so often this is used for like sporting events or the rest, when in reality, this verse is talking about all the hardships that were come, that he could overcome those hardships, no matter what they may be, imprisonments and beatings and all the things that Paul has gone through. He's actually saying, I can do all these things through strengthens me. It's the hardships, not that I can overcome and do great things. It's that in spite of all the things that may go wrong, he gives me strengths. 1 Corinthians, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong." I always love that verse. And so Lucy says, "But we can't, because he's in prison because of me." And then, of course, Edmund, you have to remember, still dealing with his love for both, whether it's Turkish delight or his own cowardice. A lot we could do, and we haven't even got anything to eat. And then, of course, Peter's reaction is much like I think most of us. I think C.S. Lewis actually makes Peter's reactions to be the visceral reaction many of us would have. "Shut up, you," said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. And then he turns and says, "What do you think, Susan? I'm a horrid feeling that Lou is right. We have to go and help whatever his name is. I mean, the faun." And so they decide that's what we will do. And so that's what they're going to head. And he says, "If only we knew where the poor chap was imprisoned." And of course, then she turned to the robin. Lucy turns and says, "Maybe the magical creatures can help us along the way." And so she sees this robin and please says, "Can you tell us where we need to go?" And so they slowly start following this robin. And I do love this little additional thing. And I wonder if maybe Lewis had come across a robin recently in one of his walks along Addison's walk around Oxford University, because it says, "You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye." So they keep following on the way until we get to a point where Edmund actually turns to Peter and says, "If you're not still too high and mighty to talk to me, I have something to say which you'd better listen to." And so here in Edmund and Peter are still very much at odds. This is not a happy walk. They're heading, trying to find someone to free them, and they don't really know how they're going to be able to do this. But I wanted to just ask this question. How do you deal with conflict? And do you see conflict as inherently bad? In fact, how do you deal with conflict is one of the huge questions that we have in our world today. There are a lot of people out there who conflict resolution is kind of their key component. In fact, I can't tell you how many business seminars I've sat through or had to listen through that deal with inter-office conflict, and how many of them are about conflict resolution and learning to get along and the rest. And so much of it, though, is built around this idea of conflict being always that there are two sides to a story. And so here's another question I would ask you. Is there always a two sides to a story? Now, I will tell you, I do have an answer to this. And notice that anytime somebody uses the word always or never, absolutes are almost always, notice I said almost always, not true, as there are always two sides to a story. And I'm going to say this. Sometimes someone is right and someone is wrong. There are not always two sides to a story. In fact, in this situation, Lucy was right, Edmund was wrong. In this situation, there is no two sides to the story. Peter was lying, or not Peter, Edmund was lying. And so because of that, we often just think in our modern concept that if there's conflict, there's a way of resolving it just by trying to get people to agree to disagree or to find a middle ground somewhere. But sometimes someone is right and someone is wrong. And there are not always two sides to a story. But so often we've bought into this idea that there must be some type of middle ground that there can be found in these situations. And our fascination with finding middle ground has often led us to allow behavior that is not Christ-like within our churches. We rarely deal with the actual issue. We just try to mediate the conflict. Instead of dealing with the actual illness, we just deal with the conflict, which would be the symptoms. We don't deal with the behavior of gossip or spreading lies or false witness, or we don't deal with bullies. We don't deal with people who are mean-spirited. We don't deal with some of these things. Now, that's not always. That's just sometimes. And to be fair, also, there are also individuals who would go out of their way to cause conflict all the time, but then always act like it's not them. They're never the person. But our fascination with finding middle ground, which comes from, in some ways, a lot of our business world, but even conflict resolution things, is that there's always two sides to a story. There's always this narrative concept to it, instead of sometimes just being, no, this person is right and this person is wrong. And this is where we don't do a good job at this. We don't actually make decisions. We just try to mediate instead of going, no, we believe this person or we do not believe this person. And it actually can cause more frustrations and more resentment when these things are not dealt with. When churches obfuscate or pass the buck or don't actually deal with situations, I cannot tell you how many individuals I've met that have left their churches that they've been in because conflict was not dealt with, where there was real hurt and real things that happened. And instead of trying to resolve the issue and actually deal with the issue, all they try to do is mediate the conflict. And all it does is ultimately tear apart churches because you don't actually deal with the situations at hand. In this case, Edmund was wrong. He lied. Peter's anger was because of the fact that Edmund knew he lied and did not take the opportunity to ask for forgiveness. And in fact, until he outed himself, he had kept his lies a secret. He was unwilling to admit he was wrong, even in the face of reality. This is a danger that you and I must be careful of. So this goes on, and he finally asks, what is it? He says, hush, not so loud. There's no good frightening the girls, but have you realized what we're doing? And he says, we don't know who this guide is, who this bird is. We might be being led into a trap. That's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, they're good birds in all the stories I've read. I'm sure a robin would have been on the wrong side. And if it comes to that, which is the right side? And notice what Edmund's doing here. He's trying to seed doubt. How do we know that the fawns are on the right side and the queen, yes, I know we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either. And then Peter says, this is what I know. The fawn saved Lucy. He said he did, but how do we know? And there's another thing, too. Has anyone the least idea of the way home from here? And then Peter says, great Scott, I hadn't thought of that. And notice what he says, what Edmund says, and no chance of dinner either. Edmund always pursuing his stomach, always pursuing what he is wanting himself, always thinking about food and the rest, and throwing these seeds of doubt all around this story. So that is the end of this chapter. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm so grateful for your presence as always. I hope you have a fantastic week. I look forward to being back with you again next week. We're starting to get into the heart of the story. I hope you're excited to see it each and every week. Look forward to being back with you all. If you ever have any needs, please reach out to me at any point in time. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Be more than happy to help you any way I can. Until next time, we will see you then.